Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Next Gen Planners podcast. My name is Dan, and I'm the head of community experience here at Next Gen Planners. And today I'm delighted to be joined all the way from, get this, LA by Natalie Taylor from Monarch Money. How are you doing today, Natalie?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And it's been a while since we've had someone from America on the podcast, actually. So I'm very happy with this. And in the UK, as we've already spoken about this, Natalie, it's now currently really heavily snowing. And I'm assuming it's not heavily snowing in LA, is it?
It is not. I don't know that you want me to answer on how
No.
it is. I got a view of the ocean and it's just about it'll be 70 today.
Okay, probably best we didn't bring that up, but never mind. We'll move on. So for anyone who doesn't know Natalie, she's there's loads of things. So she's a financial planner, a public speaker, and she's also the head of financial advice at Monarch Money as well. And I say Monarch probably is the right way to say it. I don't know, who cares? But to kick things off, Natalie, can you just tell us a little bit about what it is that you get up to on a daily basis?
Sure. Yeah, so I have sort of two career lives. On one hand, I run a planning practice. I have my own RIA, which is what we call it here in the States. And I work with clients who are in their 30s, who oftentimes have equity compensation. They have young families and they're just trying to make all the trade-off decisions that come with that season of life, and dealing with inconsistent income with equity comp events. So that's who I help on the planning side. And then I also spend half my time in fintech as the head of advice for Monarch Money. So I've actually split my career somewhat evenly between private practice and fintech. And now I'm doing both at the same time, which is really rewarding and fun because it satisfies both the breadth of impact and the depth of impact at the same time.
Wow. I was about to interrupt you, and it's a good job I didn't, because that final sentence there was beautiful. So breadth of impact and depth of impact as well. I think that's an issue that, well, not an issue, but something that people in the UK think about as well, is the idea that, you can, as a financial planner, you can revolutionize and change the lives of, let's say, 100 clients. But in reality, you have the knowledge and the education and the kind of wisdom to be able to revolutionize hundreds of thousands of clients' lives. So you get to do both of those, which is awesome. And you've got the mix that a lot of financial planners are going for, which is good. So one of the things that you talk about in your kind of speaking, and something that you mentioned to me last time when we did have our kind of initial conversation, is how your financial advice is very values based. And I think a lot of the audience would probably say their financial planning or financial advice is very values based as well. But can you give our audience some kind of fresh tips, or maybe some things that really work for you, on how it is that you get to understand the client's values when you're working with them?
Yeah, so values are a really core part of the way I plan. Those are foundational for the vast majority of my clients. When clients come to me, they typically don't know exactly what their values are. And so I created an exercise, which is similar to like a card sort of exercise. I think that do you have that over there as well? Like 50 cards that have different values, and you kind of pare down. And
I haven't seen anyone use it in the UK, but I know that it's being used by US financial planners. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So it's a version of that. It doesn't involve cards, but it's a version of that. And I have several prompter questions that I've found are really useful for clients to sort of get at what their values are. Things like, if you had to make a decision that you would make less money, what would make that worthwhile? Or if you wanted your children to describe what was important about your family, like what was important to your family growing up, what would you want them to say? And I find that some of those questions will hit home for somebody and really help them clarify, because I think values can be really nebulous and a little touchy-feely. As much as I want to be a touchy-feely person, I'm more on the on the tangible, analytical thinker side. I married a feeler, and I love that balance. But I'm more on the thinker side. So I take a really tangible view and approach to values, but I do think it's critically important. My husband and I have figured ours out, and we've been living that way for 15 years. And it's really impacted career decisions, life decisions, financial decisions. So I take my clients through that exercise, and then they pare down to 5 or 6 things that are really important to them. And we talk about them, and I ask them, 2 really simple questions. The first is, what about life right now feels in alignment with your values as you look at them on the page? And then what doesn't feel in alignment? And that usually opens up a pretty good conversation about where there might be opportunities to bring alignment. It looks different for everyone depending on what their values are. But, I can give you a couple of examples. So for some of my clients, meaningful work will come up. And I had a client, and that's one for me as well. But I had a client who told me that meaningful work was important, and she was already working for a company that was doing meaningful work in the world. And she was a VP, and I asked her, what about your work isn't meaningful? Because from the outside, it looks like you work for a company that does meaningful work. Is it because you're a VP and VPs have to spend a lot of time doing org charts and P&Ls and figuring out headcount and all that kind of stuff, clearing obstacles for their team? Or is it because of the ethos of your team? Or is it because you don't truly believe in the mission of the company? And what became clear is that she wanted to go into the nonprofit world, where she would make half as much. And so then the rest of our planning together was really focused on, how do we help you still be able to retire and still be able to buy a house and still be able to do the things you want to do, assuming that starting next year, you make half as much for the remainder of your career. And she was, in her 30s, early 40s. So I find that the values conversation ends up being very tangible and very applicable to the goals that we kind of set forth in our work together, or how we approach those goals. So for some clients, it might be taking some time off when their kids are young, that is a real priority and a real value for them. So I have clients who are stay-at-home doctors for the time being until their youngest goes to kindergarten. Yeah.
That's cool. It's so refreshing to hear that, because sometimes when we think about values, we think of, when you say values, you think of those kind of brochure values on a wall when you walk into an office, and they're like stuck on the wall, and it's like honesty,
Yes, respect,
trust, integrity,
yeah.
but then a way of thinking about it, which I learned last year when I was on a program, was values are the things that hurt you when they're taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And once you understand that kind of thing, because that's what you were saying there about being aligned and misaligned, once you understand that that's kind of what it is that the values are, it's much easier to kind of talk about them. And I can imagine actually that the way you talk about values there gets some really good conversations going. And if you were to think about this, if you told a financial advisor in the 1980s that that's how you talk to your clients, they'd be like, what on earth are you talking about? They'd be like, what? Like, why don't you just mention products to them and be done with it? But now it kind of shows that shift, doesn't it, towards more life-centered advice rather than just financial advice, which is good as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned in their goals, kind of when you were closing down that answer, you mentioned goals. And again, when we spoke last time, you and on your kind of site and everything like that, you mentioned that you have quite a different approach to working with goals around with clients around their goals. But what would you say that kind of different look is it on goal setting? What would you say is different about the way you look at goals?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that a lot of the goals that my clients are working towards look fairly standard. We're working towards retirement and funding college for kiddos and buying a house for your family, or, getting a rental, those kinds of things. But I think because we have the values conversation before we talk about goals, that there are often different goals that come up that maybe wouldn't have surfaced in terms of things that clients want to be able to achieve if we hadn't started with values. I have a client who adventure and time with their family is one of their values. And so they're going to go move to Europe for 3 years and just go on a family adventure. And so we got to plan for that. And I don't know that goal would have come up if we didn't talk about values first. So I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is, they say that you can look back 10 years and say, gosh, I'm in such a different place than I was 10 years ago. But we look 10 years forward and think, well, it'll be kind of like this, but a little more, like I'll make a little more, maybe we'll have a little bit of a bigger, whatever. But the truth is that for the clients that I'm working with that are in their, mid 30s to mid 40s, they're in a season of life where career-wise, family-wise, life-wise, things are changing at quite a rapid pace. That life 3 years ago might look very different than it does today, and life 3 years from now might look very different than it does today. And so I think holding goals with an open hand, letting the goals drive the right actions in the short term of how much should I save, how much should I invest, how much should I spend, how much should I pay down. Goals are really valuable for that. But I think also holding that like end result of the goal with an open hand to say, well, we did all the right activities, right? The goals helped us contextualize what next steps we should take, the best next steps with the information we have right now. But I think allowing the flexibility that if your goal doesn't come to fruition the way we planned, not to say that it'll be worse, oftentimes it's better. Well, we thought you'd be on track for retiring in your late 60s, but as it turns out, things have taken a turn and you can retire much earlier or take a year off now and then go back to work for a while, take some retirement years earlier or periodically as sabbaticals. So I think holding goals with an open hand is something that's a little bit different. I think being able to hold the tension between the goal driving you, but also the goal not controlling you, and being able to release it when things change, when new information or new feelings or new perspective comes up. And then I think the last thing is really that for my clients, a lot of what goals do is they help them contextualize what enough means. Most of my clients do not come from wealthy families. They have worked hard in their careers and worked in primarily tech, but sometimes outside of tech. And they have had some windfalls, but not enough to make everything a yes. There's still very tangible trade-off decisions in terms of what is possible and what isn't possible. And I think goals give a really good context for clients to understand what is enough. Because once I don't know how it is over there, but I think over here, what I've observed is once you make more than your parents did, it's hard to then contextualize what is affordable, what is reasonable, what decisions should I be making, what numbers are reasonable or unreasonable. I never fathomed that this size house would be something that I could afford. I just can't contextualize if that is affordable or not. And so I think goals do a good job of giving some context of what is enough, what is truly extra, and what's reasonable given what you want to accomplish and where you are financially.
I've never thought about it in the way that you've said pretty much all of that, but especially the part about goals controlling you. And that's such a it's like opened up loads of new ideas in my head, because it's right, goals do control you. How many times do we hear if something isn't getting you towards your goals, you've got to question why you're doing it? But the problem with that is that thing that you're doing might take you down a completely different avenue that you want to go down, but then the goal that you have set a year ago is now controlling you, and you think, well, I can't go towards that. And I've never thought about it in that way before, and it's kind of like on the fly goals as well, which is good. Like they continue to change and adapt as life goes on, which is a nice way of looking at it. And there's another thing that I was thinking there, which leads us nicely on to the next question, is this. You guys have probably been having the conversations and debates about robo advice and things like that, and automated advice for much longer than we have it here in the UK. I've been in finance for about 5 years, and the conversation's been going on for that long. And the kind of thing that comes out all the time is that, you don't get the kind of human aspects of it. And I think that kind of came across in the answer that you were talking about there, which is, can a machine or can automated advice or robo advice ever have those deep conversations that you're having with clients like you are there, and getting those values out and things like that? And that brings us nicely on to talking about Monarch, which you are head of financial advice about, like we mentioned before. So let's just kind of open that conversation up about it. Where did that come from? Can you kind of remember the conversations you're having with people? Where did it come from?
Yeah. So I have been wanting to build ultimately what is now Monarch. I've wanted to build that for more than a decade. So I've been a financial planner since I was 23 and looked 14. So I've been doing this for 17, almost 18 years. And for the first several years of my career, I had a fantastic mentor that was like a senior partner advisor, and I was an associate in his firm. And we were helping my parents' age for money and people my own age for free. And it was back then, I guess that was 2012, 2011, that I thought there's got to be a way to help people my own age. At the time I was in my mid 20s. There's got to be a way to help people my own age that can be profitable, because I had been in a financial planning practice long enough to know that there's a lot of work that goes into real financial planning. There's a lot of data that you need. There's a lot of knowledge that you need to be able to serve people well. And there's a lot of work to do. It's much less scalable than assets under management. I could manage a $10 million portfolio with relatively the same amount of time investment as $1 million portfolio. But to help that client from a planning perspective that has $10 million is very different than helping a client that has $1 million. And there's just sort of a critical mass of time that you need to invest to be able to do good financial planning for people. So I saw from the small business planning side how difficult it was to serve younger clients profitably. And so at that time, my husband and I and a friend started exploring, we called it Breadbox, but we started exploring, how could we use digital capabilities to figure out how to help people who are in their 20s and 30s, to help them make good contextualized financial decisions based on what they want to accomplish without having them have to work one-on-one with an advisor. So it's something that I've been thinking about for a really long time. I ended up working for a company called LearnVest over here, which was ultimately acquired. But that was really our mission there. And that's why I joined, was we wanted to make financial planning affordable and accessible for the masses. And we wanted to do it in a digital first way. So we ended up having kind of a hybrid, you'd have a planner and you'd also have digital tools, which I think was a meaningful step in the right direction. But we weren't digital first enough to really develop the software and the consumer digital experience that needed to exist. And then we got acquired by an insurance company. And you can sort of figure how that all ended up. So, so LearnVest didn't get there, but it was still something that was so important to me. And then actually, well, through a couple of different colleagues, I learned about Monarch Money. And they were in seed stage, so had just raised one little round and were just getting up and running. And I met the team, and they said to me exactly what I had been wanting to do for this many years. They said, we want to make financial planning affordable and accessible, and we don't think that the tools of financial planning should be reserved for advisors, that there's a lot that we can provide that exists between the budgeting apps and the Robo advice, which here in the States is really just asset management. I mean, I'll do a calculation to tell you how much you should save for retirement because I want to manage, the Robo wants to take the assets to be able to manage it. And all of the advice is really about the investments. And that's meaningful and valuable. But there's all this middle space between budgeting and implementation where all the decisions happen. And nobody has successfully met that need in a digital way. And so that's what Monarch came to me saying they wanted to do. And that's what I came to them saying I wanted to do. And so it was just like sort of one of those magical fits. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And with Monarch, you're effectively, and we don't have anything like this in the UK, by the way, which is why I'm so interested by it. Because what you're doing is effectively giving the consumers the ability to create, the consumers themselves, by the way, as well, not the advisors, but give them the ability to create and maintain financial plans themselves. Now, this is a bit of a closed question, but I think you will probably go into a better answer for it. But do you still find that people also want advice alongside that from a professional as well, like being able to do it themselves? do they also want an advisor to help them through it as well?
Yeah, I think there's still room for both. I think, in the US, we've had this either or, robo versus human advisors debate for more than a decade. With Betterment and Wealthfront, that really came to a head and has continued over the last 10 years. What are the robos going to do to the way that humans can get paid? And which way is the right way forward? Which way is going to dominate? In my mind, it was never an either or. You don't say, are people going to be 25 or are they going to be 55? They're going to be both. And they're going to have different needs in their 20s than they do in their 50s, than they do in their 40s. And so I don't think that, if Monarch is wildly successful, I think we're largely going to be helping a demographic that could never really be served profitably by financial planners anyhow, unless the financial planner, and I would say financial planner in air quotes a little bit, was incentivized by trying to sell insurance products. They might still want the attention of this demographic, but I don't think they're being necessarily well served by those professionals. So I think we're largely helping a group that has never been well served by humans, either ignored completely or served through, thinly veiled financial planning that's really to sell an insurance product. So I don't think that Monarch being wildly successful puts me out of business as a firm owner. I think that there are only so many things that we can accomplish with software. I think that some people need to sit down with their partner, with a human, to moderate, to listen, to reflect back, to help them hear one another better, to help them get on the same page in a way that software will never do. But I think that there's things that software can do much more efficiently than a human ever will. And so, I don't worry that one will put me out of work in the other. I think there's always going to be the need for both. And there always has been, and I don't see that changing.
No, it's about maximizing the relationship and the kind of skills of both, isn't it? It's like a human relationship. There's things, like you said before, about you and your husband. There's things that each of you do which are fantastic that the other person can't do, but when you come together as a team, you can really, really start to make a difference.
That's
and you
right.
can do the same thing with robo and human advice. If you put them together, imagine what we could do, and imagine how many more people we could serve if all those kind of little inefficiencies that humans are terrible at can be taken away by software. And that's how you mix them together.
That's right.
I'm feeling very inspired today by this. So the thing that we're talking about, so the personalized advice tool that Monarch is still in beta mode as we speak, or I don't know how you say that word. It's a Greek word, isn't it? So this is a form of kind of artificial intelligence that we've been saying will help clients for years, like we've been talking about there. But how is it working at Monarch? How is that kind of personalized advice tool actually help? Have you found success in the early stages?
Yeah, we have found a ton of traction in the early stages, which has been great. I think where we started was we need to understand where you've been and where you are. And now we get to build sort of the other half of that loop. If you think of like an infinity symbol, like we've done a pretty good job of building where you came from and where you are now, so that you can see everything in one place, because that's critical. And now we get to build that second half of the loop of where do you want to go and how can we help you get there most efficiently. And so we do have an advice product in beta, which is released to all users. But it's largely content based. There's prioritization underlying it. There's good advice in it. But I wouldn't say that that's reflective of where we're headed. The advice itself is, so you wouldn't be surprised to say, oh, this is how big my emergency fund should be. This is just the same as that article that I read, or that content experience in beta that I experienced. The advice is consistent with where we're headed. But we're just now getting to the place where we're really getting to build all of the rules engine behind it, so that we can take in a user's data and give them meaningful, tangible, impact-weighted advice.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And we've already kind of been talking about this, but we've got a thing called the advice gap. I think you guys call it the same thing across there, which is basically the gap between the haves and the have-nots and being able to pay for financial advice or financial planning. How far do you think this could go in actually closing that gap? Do you think that this could, if it, like you mentioned before, if it kicks off, if it goes really well, if it takes over the world, do you think that that advice gap could be closed by something like this?
I do. I do. I think that this is sort of that missing link that we've needed for a long time. And I think that it's only in believing and thinking user first. So, in planning, I would say client. In fintech, I would say user. But it's only in thinking user first of what do users really need? What is that? Where is that advice gap really coming from? And what do they actually need versus what can I sell them? That I think something like Monarch really, really gets traction and gets built, because the whole team, I would say, is relentlessly user first. We're very protective of who we're serving and that they are served well, because there are a lot of disincentives in our industry over here. I'm sure that something analogous exists over there too. So to create in a relentlessly user first way, I think has enabled us to really have the opportunity to fill that advice gap.
Yeah. Well, I am very excited to see where this goes, and I hope that there's something. I mean, so we, to give my example of this, when I used to be in a financial planning firm, clients used to always, look at the pretty colors on the cash flow model and think, and then they say to us, "Oh, this is amazing. Can I go home and play with this? Can I log in and do this myself?" And then we would always have to be like, "Oh no, I'm afraid it's only for us to use." And it shouldn't be like that, because it's their, like you've been saying throughout this, it's their advice and it's their money, and they should be able to control this and go home and have a play around with it, but not to the extent where it makes the advisor or the financial planner not needed anymore. Because I mean, like you said before, it's if you work together with these kind of things, if technology and financial planners can work together, then that makes the client's life or the user's life much more valuable, doesn't it? Okay, so let's move on then. So you're also a public speaker on personal finances. On your website, it says for solopreneurs, millennials, and women. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, that's right.
Okay, so as at Next Gen, we have what's called a speaker and influencer program. So we train people for the last 3 years. We've been training people up to become public speakers, and we allow them the opportunity to share their ideas at our conferences. So I'm always really interested to hear from actual established public speakers on the kind of tips or advice that you would give to people who are actually wanting to get into that space. What would you, or perhaps what have you learned over the years that you would tell them if they wanted to be public speakers?
Yeah, I love the program that you do to help new speakers get the experience and to learn how to speak. I think that's huge. In terms of what tips I would give to those who are wanting to do it, I'll say at a very base level, like, make sure you're willing to travel. that doesn't bother you. For me, I have 2 kids and a wonderful husband, and I'm speaking much less now because, well, I have two full-time jobs, and also because being away from the family isn't great in this season. So I would say make sure you're willing to do what it takes. But in a very tangible way, I think figuring out, even if you just have one topic, really fleshing out, like, what are the 3 key takeaways for this topic? What really matters? What do I want my audience to walk away thinking and feeling and remembering about what we covered? And I think using stories, personal stories, or stories from clients, I think that's a great way to communicate the message that you're trying to give. And I think structuring your talk in a way that allows people to absorb the information. So what I mean by that is that, I do some content, or I used to do some content consulting. And what I would say is, like, you have to build the bookshelf before you start throwing books at people, right? So, like, you have to help them build the shelf, build the framework to be able to absorb all of the really good content that you're going to share with them
Mm.
before you start giving them those nuggets, those books, those pieces of knowledge or perspective that you have for them. So I think when you're designing your talk, thinking about how do I build that framework, that bookshelf for them before I start just throwing great information at them. Because for them to be able to absorb and contextualize it, you need to help them along with that process.
It's a really good idea. Yeah, I completely agree with both of them, especially the topic one as well. Getting very clear on what the audience is going to take away from it sets it up well, because otherwise the audience will be thinking, are they ever going to get to the point that they're intended to here, or am I just going to give up, half an hour of my life for no reason? And I agree with you on the framework. It's interesting, isn't it, with frameworks, because we have them at the Speaker and Influencer program, and they can come from anywhere, and you don't need to be an established author or anything like that to come up with your own framework for people to understand. People think some things like anagrams and acronyms and things like that work really well in this area. Have you found like some success with those kind of things, like acronyms and all that kind of stuff? Or
I don't really use those, to be honest. I think that for me, the most effective thing is to be able to show somebody a picture of what I'm talking about. So when we talk about money, because that's what I talk about, I think there's an expectation that we're going to talk numbers and we're going to talk, 401ks and different jargon. And so for me, I find that if I can present the information either verbally by painting a picture verbally, or showing a visual of like a flow of how money would move in your life, that really helps a lot of people like build that bookshelf, that framework, that context for then being able to understand the details and to be open to the numbers or percentages that I might share. I also open pretty much every talk with just a brief blurb about like, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life, and I'm not here to tell you what you should do with your money. I'm here to give you the tools that wherever you are in life, wherever you are in your finances, whatever you're working on, that you can apply those to where you are now and get to where you want to go. And I think that's important, because I think people bring a lot of, I don't want to call it baggage, but they bring a lot with them when they come to the topic of finances in general. And so for me, it's important early on to sort of disarm them, to help them feel comfortable and like they're in the right place. Whether they're, they just joined the company and they're making $40,000 a year and trying to make ends meet and, don't have a car yet, or whether they're more successful and making a few $100,000 a year and well on in their career. And then for me, that's always a challenge that I need to rise to in any content that I come up with, that it really does need to live up to that. It really does need to be applicable and help somebody from where they are, regardless of what seat they're in.
yeah, isn't it weird that taboo around money and having to disarm doesn't really change no matter how much money you're earning? It's still something that is just not like, you just don't really talk about it you wouldn't open conversations about it with your friends and things like that. I'm a bit agnostic on whether that we should or not, because sometimes private things should probably just stay private. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that like you mentioned, there are two examples of being on. I know that you said $40,000, which is a bit different to £40,000, but I know exactly what you mean. Right up to the very top. Yeah. So you've also worked with thousands of people. That's what it says on your website, anyways. People when it comes to the personal finances. So for the benefit of the audience, who, let's be honest, the majority of them will be financial planners or trainee financial planners and stuff like that. What have you found? What patterns have you found work really well for you when you're working with clients that may also work well for the audience as well?
That's a good question. I think when I was a young financial planner, I would hear this and it wasn't helpful. But I would hear older financial advisors say, just be quiet and listen. And I was like, well, that's not really all that helpful, because as a young planner, I wanted to prove that I knew what I was talking about. They weren't coming to me for a therapy session. They were coming to bring their financial problems to me, and then I was going to figure out the solutions, and then I was going to give them back. So for me to be just quiet and listen the whole meeting just didn't make any sense to me. And I think now, 17 years in, I understand a lot more about what older planners were telling me at that time. But I guess what I would say is, early in my career, I think I spent a lot of time. Do you have Doogie Howser over there, or did you have Doogie Howser?
No, I've heard it in American culture, but we don't have it across here.
Okay, well, Doogie Howser was a show that was on in, I don't know, the 90s. I'm really aging myself here. I was born in the early 80s, but it was a show about a 14-year-old doctor or something. Like, he was just a whiz kid and became a doctor. And he was Dr. Hauser, Dr. Doogie Howser. And I think early in my career, I looked very young for my age. All of my clients were my parents' age. And I think I was so focused on sort of hiding my youth and proving that I was intelligent and smart and knew what I was talking about, that I was a Doogie Howser type, that I wasn't present in the way to understand the nuance of what matters to the client, or to be able to pick up on tension between them, or to ask the second question, to ask that deeper follow-up question of, or if one of the partners is very quiet for a certain part of the meeting, to check in and say, do you have anything that what would you add here? So I think, I share all of that. This is a roundabout way to say that I think that what those older advisors, when I was a young advisor, were trying to convey to me was how to be present for the other, for the client. And I don't think I did a great job of it. I think I've, always been doing the best I can. I think I've given good advice throughout my career. I've always cared very deeply about the client and doing the right thing. But I think I've gotten better at doing it because I've gotten past the point where I'm focused on what is the perception of me, so that I can focus on who is the client. This is their meeting, this is their life, this is their time. And I think that's what those older advisors meant when they said, just shut up and listen. I think that's what they meant, but I didn't understand it at the time that they were saying it to me. And I think now that's what they meant was, care less about your presence in the meeting and being the Doogie Howser type, or proving your worth, so that you can be present for them, because that's what's important. Asking that follow-up question, picking up on that nuance of what matters to them, so that you can give them the advice that's right for them. Because although I use the same fundamental financial planning principles for all of my clients, the advice is different. I will tell one client, you should quit your job. And I'll tell another client, you should stay. And their finances, their numbers might look very similar, but because I see them as people, and I've asked the deeper question and really listened and processed the answer, I can give them better advice because it's meant for them, because I was able to hear it better than I think I could early in my career.
Yeah, I love that. It's actually a really, 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 really good piece of advice. And I do think there is still an element of, I did a podcast last year with Scott Frank. I think you might know Scott Frank, CFP.
Do, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that kind of works with what you're saying there as well. I think he also gave the same advice, which is basically just kind of leaving the silences there. So as humans, we're always kind of, used to filling silences because we perhaps don't like them. Whereas in these kinds of calls, it's kind of natural to just let the kind of room speak for itself and the mood in the room as well. I think that works alongside with what you're saying. What you're basically saying is, ignore that voice in your head that tells you that you've got to prove yourself, or you've got to kind of show off for the clients, because what they will probably value more is just being listened to. And again, that works. I think it's also kind of similar to what the advice you listened to when you were a young financial planner as well. It's all kind of the same stuff, but I agree with you on what you're saying there. It's a really good tip. Fantastic. Well, no, hang on a second. I've been asking this question to people, and this is I took this question out for a while, and I don't really know why I took it out, but I've since brought it back because some of the answers we get to this are really, really cool. So obviously we're called Next Gen Planners. In 20 years' time, I'm probably going to be getting out of the way to let younger people through, which is the way that hopefully everyone has that same attitude. But what do you think that financial planning will look like in let's say 20 years time?
That's a great question.
It's a Doogie Howser question doesn't work, does it? I was trying to think of an American reference, but it's a one that gets you thinking, anyways.
Yeah. I think here in America we'd always say self-driving cars, because there was in 10 years we're all going to be driving self-driving cars, and I think it's been 10 years since we started saying that. But yeah, I mean, I would hope that in 20 years that the majority of financial advisors are financial planning practitioners, and that it's not a product sales industry anymore. It's a service industry. I would love to see like vast commission and fee compression on the insurance side, and more fee transparency for opaque and complex products. I'd love to see technology do more of what I know that it can do. You know, here in the States, it's challenging because some of our biggest players in the financial planning software space, are so deeply embedded in the partnerships that they're a part of with giant companies that for them to really innovate or take a fundamentally new approach is almost impossible, because other large companies that have a lot of reps have built infrastructure on top of their software. So for them to do something fundamentally new or different or innovative is much more challenging. There are like real structural barriers to them innovating. So my hope is that, and there are some new players that are emerging and getting traction in the financial planning software space. But my hope is that tech can do more of what it's good at, so that we can do more of what we're good at. And yeah, so that is my hope. I'm just going to say that that's where I think we'll be, because that's my hope for where we'll be.
And of course, that Monarch will have helped 3,000 million families around the world, and
yeah,
and it's a publicly listed company and has shareholders from around the world.
Sure,
that'd be good.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely. I mean, I think there's so much potential for Monarch and what we're doing. And I desperately hope that it's us that gets to solve this problem and be a part of this solution that, at least here in the States, we desperately need. Yeah. I think it could make a really meaningful impact on the industry and on millions of people. And I don't think it squeezes humans out of the financial advice space. I think there's still plenty of room. And I hope that evolution of, software and digital and tech doing more allows humans, human advisors, to really evolve their skill set towards meeting those needs that can't be met with software. Being great listeners and hearing those nuances and talking about values and helping with goal development and helping partners get on the same page with money and sort that. I mean, there's so much there, dealing with the stuff that you grew up with around money. There's so much there that humans can do that is so valuable. So that's my hope.
Good stuff. Fantastic. So I think we'll probably close things down because my dog is starting to bark, as always. So we always like to ask our guests for, I always say book to start off with, but it can be any piece of content. So it can be a movie, it can be an album, so anything. What would you what anything that's made a difference to your life that you recommend other people would consume? What would you say?
Well, I think I would say I think I would say a book, and it would be The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. It's a relatively new book, but it's been out for a couple of years now. And it's just nugget after nugget of really good. It's very consumable. You can read it in just a couple days. But there's so much perspective in there that I think is so valuable. So I would say Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Brilliant. I don't think you'd be surprised to know that that isn't the first time that that's been recommended, because
I'm glad.
I'm going to put myself out on the line and say that I've never read it. So your advice will be taken on board by me, and I will give it a go. I'm sure someone in the audience must have a copy of that lying around somewhere. So if you fancy sending it to me up in here in the north of England, I'll be more than happy to accept a copy as well. Brilliant. Well, I think we'll close things there, but I've really enjoyed that conversation, Natalie. I'm feeling very, very optimistic about the future of kind of this link between technology and financial planners as well. So you've done a really, really fantastic job there. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today. We always like to give the last word to our guests to say a big thank you for coming on the show. So can you tell us where we can find you? Tell us where we can connect with you. And I always shock people by saying, if you want to leave us with a bit of motivation, the floor is yours.
Well, the best place to find me is LinkedIn. I think I might be the only Natalie Taylor CFP, but there could be a couple of us. It's a somewhat generic name. But yeah, that's the best place to find me. Any content that I'm doing, any projects, any hiring, anything, I post on there. So that's the best spot to find me. And in terms of motivation for younger advisors, I think I would say that this is really, being a financial planner has the potential to be incredibly meaningful work, where, for me, the highs of being able to help a client, to see the connection be made, to see them realize something that was important to them, to see them walk away from a job that was sucking the life out of them, and to know that I was a part of helping them feel okay doing that, or staying at home with their baby if that's what they want to do, or make a change in their life that the work we did together allowed them to do. There is almost nothing more meaningful than that. And so I would say, don't get bogged down by payout ratios and product sales and all of the things that we see in this industry, because there's a lot of ugly stuff in this industry. There's also really, really beautiful work to be done, that I can't imagine anything better.
What a good way to finish. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natalie. So that was Natalie Taylor from Monarch Money on the Next Gen Planners podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll be able to find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and our website to share it. And we're also on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're not on TikTok just yet. Watch this space. And our website is nextgenplanners.co.uk. And on there, you'll find more information about the Speaker and Influencer program that we talked about here with Natalie, the training contract, the Future Leaders program, the Blast Off program, Advice Stack, Doc Vinci, our conference, which is coming up in May and June this year, and also our amazing community, which now has over 700 financial service heroes in there, all collaborating, all growing together. And it's a really, really cool place to be. So that was nextgenplanners.co.uk. And of course, if you could leave us a review, that really, really does help us grow the podcast as well. But again, thank you so much to Natalie for joining me on the show today, all the way from LA. Thank you guys for listening as wherever you are, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.